There's a particular kind of person you've probably encountered at some point. Maybe it's someone you work with, or a friend, or even a family member. They don't have Instagram. They're not on TikTok. They deleted Facebook years ago or never made one in the first place. And when you ask them about it, they give you some version of the same answer. I just don't need it, or it's not really for me. Casual, unbothered, almost like the question itself is slightly strange to them. Most people hear that and assume one of a few things. They assume this person is older or technophobic or maybe a little antisocial. Some assume it's a political stance, a kind of digital protest. Others think it's performative, that the person is secretly curious but trying to seem above it all. These are the stories we tell about people who opt out of something that the majority has opted into. But what if those explanations are almost entirely wrong? What's actually happening with people who genuinely, sustainably avoid social media isn't what it looks like from the outside, and understanding it reveals something surprisingly deep about how different human brains process social information, reward, and identity, and what happens when a particular environment stops matching a particular nervous system. The common assumption starts with a straightforward premise. Social media is inherently appealing. It offers connection, entertainment, validation, and novelty, all things humans are biologically wired to seek. So, the logic follows that someone who avoids it must either be missing something, resisting something, or not fully understanding what they're rejecting. The refusal gets framed as a gap, a deficit of some kind. But research into how people respond to social feedback tells a more complicated story. Not all brains process social reward the same way. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with anticipation and reward seeking, varies significantly in how strongly it responds to unpredictable, variable stimuli, which is exactly what social media is engineered to deliver. Platforms are built around what psychologists call variable ratio reinforcement. You don't know when the next like, comment, or interesting post is coming, and that unpredictability is precisely what makes the reward system fire more intensely. For a significant portion of people, that mechanism is highly activating. The brain chases the next hit. For others, the same mechanism produces something closer to noise, an uncomfortable overstimulation that doesn't feel rewarding so much as draining. A 2021 study on sensory processing sensitivity found that individuals with higher neural sensitivity tend to experience dense social environments, including digital ones, as cognitively costly in ways that lower sensitivity individuals simply don't. It's not that the stimulation isn't registering, it's registering too well. This doesn't mean these individuals are introverted by default or socially avoidant in the clinical sense. That's an important distinction. Many people who avoid social media are genuinely social in their offline lives. They maintain close friendships, they enjoy conversation, they're deeply connected to the people around them. What they're avoiding isn't connection. What they're avoiding is a specific delivery system for connection that their nervous system doesn't find efficient or satisfying. Think about what social media actually asks of your attention. It presents an endless stream of social signals, expressions, opinions, status updates, implicit comparisons, and it asks the brain to process and contextualize all of them simultaneously. For most people, the brain habituates to this. It learns to skim. But for others, habituation doesn't come as easily. Every signal still carries weight. Every piece of information still gets processed with something closer to full attention. Over time, that doesn't feel like scrolling. It feels like attending 100 conversations at once. And here's where something more interesting enters the picture. There's a concept in psychology called identity-based decision-making, the idea that a significant portion of the choices people make aren't purely strategic or rational, but are expressions of who they understand themselves to be. A person who defines themselves around depth, focus, or a particular kind of presence in the world isn't just choosing not to use Instagram because of how it makes them feel in the moment. They're opting out because participation in that environment would feel at a subtle level like a misalignment with their own self-concept. This is the piece that almost never gets discussed. When we ask why someone refuses social media, we tend to look for external reasons. Too busy, bad experience, doesn't see the point. But for a meaningful subset of people, the deeper reason is closer to, it doesn't feel like me. Not as a moral stance, not as a lifestyle brand, just as a quiet, persistent sense that this particular environment doesn't map on to how they experience the world. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most involved in long-term planning, identity coherence, and evaluating whether something serves your actual goals, plays a significant role here. In people who've done what researchers sometimes call deliberate identity construction, the prefrontal cortex becomes quite active in filtering out environments that feel misaligned, even when those environments are socially normative. The brain, in a sense, is doing its job. It's protecting coherence. That doesn't make them superior. It doesn't make them more self-aware or more evolved. It simply suggests that for some people, the cost-benefit calculation that social media runs in the brain returns a consistent negative, not because of ignorance or fear, but because of a specific kind of internal architecture. Now, here's the unexpected part, the thing that might reframe how you see all of this. Several studies on social comparison, which is one of the primary psychological mechanisms social media activates, have found that people vary widely not in whether they engage in social comparison, but in how much distress they experience from it. The difference isn't moral. It's not about confidence or insecurity in any simple sense. It appears to be tied to how the brain processes social context and whether it treats comparison as information or as threat. For people whose brains lean towards the latter, repeated exposure to social comparison environments doesn't build tolerance. It builds a low-grade, persistent background noise that's hard to name but impossible to ignore. What's striking about this is that many of these people can't fully articulate why social media feels wrong to them. They just know it does. And because the dominant narrative says the platform is neutral, that it's only how you use it that matters, they sometimes internalize the idea that there's something off about their reaction, that they're being oversensitive or missing something obvious about how it works. But the reaction isn't a flaw, it's data. The nervous system is communicating something accurate about the fit between this particular environment and this particular person. The fact that the environment is ubiquitous doesn't make the mismatch less real. What this ultimately reveals isn't really about social media at all. It's about the much larger question of how human beings navigate environments that weren't designed with their specific neurology in mind. We live in an era that moves fast, produces enormous amounts of social information, and rewards a particular kind of engagement. Some people are well suited to that by the nature of how their brains are wired. Others are navigating a persistent low-level friction that most of the cultural conversation never quite acknowledges. The people who quietly opt out aren't making a statement about the people who opt in. They're not morally opposed to connection, or secretly superior, or running from something they're afraid to face. Most of them have simply, through some combination of self-awareness and necessity, recognized that a particular kind of environment costs them more than it gives back, and they've acted on that recognition without needing anyone else to validate it. There's something worth sitting with in that. Not as a lesson, not as a call to do the same, but as a reminder that the ways people move through the world, especially the quiet, unannounced ways, often have more going on beneath the surface than the obvious explanation suggests. If this way of thinking about behavior and psychology resonates with you, you'll probably find a lot to connect with in the next video on why certain people are drawn to solitude, not as isolation, but as something the brain actively seeks out for reasons that go much deeper than preference.